Dash, inventor extraordinaire. A mechanologist from the city of Metrix, Dash is a brilliant inventor with a creative mind and a spark of genius. Born into the city of tomorrow, she grew up surrounded by some of the greatest minds in Metrix, playing in the laboratories and workshops of Techlo Industries scientists. Brimming with enthusiasm, she learned to explore the world around her, wanting to experience everything that life has to offer. Dash is stubborn and rebellious. Her energetic nature often gets her into trouble, and once she gets an idea in her head, it's difficult to dissuade her. However, the Techlo family name has allowed her to follow her whims and crazy ideas, providing both funding and protection from the law. Dash despises the rigidity and dullness of Metrix upper class and will do anything to avoid becoming just like them. Stroke of genius. Amidst the clamour of the marketplace, a woman pushed her way through the crowds, clutching a parcel to her chest. Her long brown hair was drawn back into a neat braid, several copper cogs flashing in the light as she ducked under a metal worker's load. In one hand, she held an instructional booklet, glancing down at it with a frown. Her expression seemed troubled as she stared down at one of the diagrams, turning the page with her thumb. Devices, trinkets, one-of-a-kind inventions. Get your steam tech here. As the flow of the crowd shoved her out to the sides of the thoroughfare, she stumbled into a merchant's stall, drawing his attention. He reached out with one plump, gloved hand to steady her. Behind a single table, adorned with a crudely painted sign, the merchant peered out from beneath his bushy eyebrows, curled lips revealing a toothy grin. His entire head was covered by a mass of messy white hair and a giant hat, his figure obscured by layers upon layers of cloth, leather and fur.
"You all right, lady? Look like you're having some trouble. Maybe one of these devices is just what you need."
The woman looked down at the array of devices scattered across the table, each one formed from mismatched metal, some with the remnants of labels or other logos still half etched into the surface. I'm fine, thanks. I don't need anything."
"You're a research assistant, right?"
He smiled, winking when the woman stared at him in surprise.
"I know one when I see one. What you got there?"
A focal plane, actually.
"Oh? For a laser device?"
When the woman nodded, he merely sighed in response, scratching at the thick edges of his long, shaggy beard.
"They don't make those like they used to. I wish you luck, lass. Sounds like you'll need it."
"What?" She tilted her head, squinting. "What do you mean?"
"Oh, the lasers these days aren't nearly as powerful as they used to be. Nobody makes them like that anymore. When I was a lad, you could carve furniture with a laser. Now you'd be lucky to cut a centennial loaf. Of course, there's always the induction chamber."
"What's an induction chamber?" The research assistant frowned, clutching the package tightly. "Why would that help?"
"Well, you see, it can give any device an extra boost of steam energy. No matter how new or old your steam laser is, an induction chamber will fix it right up. Have it running like the giga-drilled elevator at sunrise."
He held up a large cylinder emphatically, clearing his throat.
"Is simply the best investment for a discerning researcher such as yourself. I'll even lower the price. Just for you, this here device is a mere 15 credits. It's handmade, one of a kind, invented by yours truly. You won't find a better deal at the markets than this.
You made it. She looked the merchant up and down, frowning.
Designed it from scratch and built it myself. There's nothing else like it. I'll even install it directly into the focal plane.
The woman looked back and forth between the induction chamber and the focal plane, biting her lip. Well, I only have 6 credits.
Deal.
The merchant nodded, extending a hand across the table. When she placed the focal plane into his palm, he twirled it, raising it to the sky to peer through the lens. It spun back and forth between his hands as he produced a driver, seemingly out of nowhere, undoing the bolts and tossing them to one side. The woman watched him closely as he worked on the device, eyes darting from side to side as she struggled to keep up with his flashy motions. 1 second, the induction chamber was sitting on the corner of the table, and the next, it was in his hand. She caught a flash of copper as it disappeared into the unit, somehow managing to fit, despite the difference in size and shape. With a flourish, he reconnected all of the bolts, revealing the completed unit.
Here you are, 6 credits.
She peered down at the unit in his hands, eyebrows furrowed. But it looks exactly the same.
6 credits.
How do you even fit?
6 credits.
As the credits ticked over into his account, the woman looked up at him, eyes narrowed. Hey, if this doesn't work, I will come back for my credits. The merchant shrugged, tucking the device into her arms.
Take care.
He watched quietly as she immediately turned and disappeared into the crowds, giving a little wave. In the light of midday, the plumes of white around the city were cast a pale gold, parted by the bright blue glow of the Gigadrill elevator in the distance. As shadows crept across the concrete, the merchant remained at his stall, hands cupped around his mouth as he shouted his wares to passers-by. Yet as the afternoon dragged on, he slowly began to sag, shoulders hunched and back curved. Every would-be customer kept walking straight past the man, despite his best efforts to catch their attention.
Oh, okay, I'm out.
The merchant groaned, reaching into one sleeve to retrieve a small key.
Time to check up on that researcher from earlier.
He ducked behind his stall, unlocking a false panel in the back of the stand. Glancing from side to side, he pulled off his wig, revealing a head of bright copper hair. Removing several layers of clothing, the gleam of burnished metal flashed in the sun as the merchant stashed the disguise beneath the market stall. A petite, spry young girl stepped out of her platform shoes, a shower of freckles scattered across her face.
Now,
Dash chirped, producing a tracking device with a grin. Let's see where you got to. Slipping out from behind her stall, Dash squeezed past a group of street kids attempting to avoid the attention of an enforcer. She began to make her way through the crowds, gaze flicking back to the display unit attached to her wrist. Leaving the commotion of the markets behind, she traipsed through the midtown markets toward the West Rise, travelling further and further into the maze of laboratories.
not R&D then?
She murmured as she passed beneath the shadow of Centennial Consumables head office.
And you're too far from the centre of the Rise to be at Cogworks HQ. Weird.
Dash stalked past the cluster of Cogworks conglomerate buildings as she continued onward, tapping intermittently at her tracker.
Ugh, come on.
Slowly, a great ivory tower came into view, stretching toward the sky. The Techlo Industries Centre of Operations gleamed in the light of day, a shining beacon amongst the sea of darkened copper.
The needle!
After a moment, Dash groaned loudly, hissing through her teeth.
Shit, not again. I hope they haven't started already.
She broke into a run, pushing her way past a group of couriers. Dash ran up to the entrance, banging on the door. Inside, the receptionist turned to glare at her, pausing when she saw her face. After a moment, she picked up the receiver of her tele-unit, slamming her hand on a button and talking quickly to the person on the other end. Grimacing, Dash held up her hands and backed away, quickly ducking around to head toward the east side of the building. Looking up at the ivory surface of the tower, she began latching her gear onto the sleek surface.
You'd think they'd have learned how to stop me by now.
Dash muttered to herself as she slowly began to scale the side of the building.
Especially after last time.
She spared a glance at the tracking device.
I really hope that my calibrations were correct.
As she drew closer to the 47th floor, she felt the metal begin to vibrate underneath her palms. Slowly, Dash peeked over the edge of the window frame, peering into the laboratory within. The walls were lined with shelves, displaying different kinds of ore, metals and minerals, each carefully labelled, along with a collection of analytical tools and geological devices. A scientist rushed past her, heading in the direction of the elevator. As he passed, he revealed the massive laser standing in the centre of the room, pointing directly at a large chunk of Tennyton ore, its magnified beam growing stronger with each passing second.
Who was responsible for this?
The lead scientist roared, spittle flying from his lips as he whipped around to stare at the research assistant from the marketplace. Clad in his monogrammed Teklo coat, Wyverstone glared at her with steel grey eyes, staring down the length of his hooked nose.
Clara?
I didn't. I swear, this isn't...
Clara stuttered, raising her hands in front of her. Behind her, the chunk of Tennyton ore seemed to almost shiver, shifting slightly on the metal surface. With a great shuddering boom, the room exploded in a cloud of bright blue dust. A small Tennyton fragment flew toward the window, bouncing off the glass with a sharp ping. Wyverstone stared blankly at his surroundings, face pale, one eye twitching. Every individual in the room looked down to find themselves coated in a layer of bright blue, almost completely concealing the clothing beneath. For a moment, all was silent. Then a peal of laughter shattered the tentative quiet. As one, the group of scientists turned toward the window, greeted with the sight of the small mechanologist's face pressed up against the glass. Beneath the fine layer of bright blue, Wyverstone's face darkened, turning an unhealthy shade of purple.
You?
He withdrew a laser pistol from one of the drawers, raising it to fire at Dash. Throwing a hand over her mouth, she frantically shook her head.
Hang on a second. I swear, it wasn't intentional this time.
Wasn't intentional?
Wyverstone roared, firing in Dash's direction.
Someone bring me that brat right now. Somebody call Thiru and tell her to control her daughter. No, call Teklo. Call the Iron Council. Bring me my phone this instant.
Dash grimaced as the man continued raving, waving her fingers sheepishly at the occupants of the room as she ducked out of view, beginning to descend down the face of the needle. Her feet touched the ground just as the front doors burst open, revealing Wyverstone standing in the entranceway, several staff members standing just behind him. Turning on her heel, Dash made for the nearest aperture, ducking down into the city level below. Needle in a haystack. From her seat on the edge of the rooftop, Dash looked down upon the rooftops of Coppertown, through to the thick layer of smog that separated the sprawl from the rest of Metrix. In the distance, the automatons of Zinnia Park moved and shifted on their pedestals, dancing against the faint light of the Gigadrill elevator. Dash watched as a ball of molten plasma dropped from the top of the elevator, plummeting to the mining pits far below.
Oi, you listening or what?
Ricky's eyebrows furrowed, nose wrinkling as Dash finally looked in his direction.
Kinda. Not really.
I'm trying to tell ya,
He drawled, rolling his eyes.
we got a good un. Pulled off a big heist a couple of days ago. Gonna keep us all in food for a week easy. Smug old trout didn't even see us coming.
One of the other boys passing by cut in with a laugh, tossing Ricky a bruised apple. Ricky caught it in one hand, ruffling the boy's bright ginger hair with the other.
I'm telling ya, you should join us for the next one. I got a tip.
Ricky stopped when Dash immediately groaned, shaking her head.
If I had a copper for every time you've said that.
No, really, just hear me out. I got a tip.
He continued, blatantly ignoring Dash, pulling a face at him.
About the guards on this load from Cogworks, right? Big load, big cash. Bunch of Tennyton stuff, just waiting to go out to some private merc company. We don't even need to steal all of it. We get a sack full of this stuff and run, and we'll be well minted.
Dash blinked, raising an eyebrow.
Ricky, you know how many guards they put on anything made with Tennyton ore? Everyone's trying to get their hands on it.
But I got a tip. Been a delay. Not gonna be able to get 'em all in it for another couple of weeks. We got a plan.
No way. Besides, what happens if you get caught? Your luck can't hold out forever.
Can't blame me for trying, Tex.
Ricky shrugged.
Besides, it's better than starving.
You always say that. You could make stuff, you know.
You'd be good at it. Dash tossed back her hair, grinning.
I made 15 credits a couple of days ago. Sold one of my gadgets in the markets.
Ricky chuckled, shaking his head.
Sure, Red. And how much you spend making it?
It was made out of scrap.
Oh, so that's why your suit looks like that.
Like what?
Your suit looks like something you found in a junkyard.
It's called the DRESS.
Dash hissed, crossing her arms.
It's a state-of-the-art prototype.
Grinning, Ricky pointed at a loose wire poking out of her chest plate.
I told you, it's a prototype.
She quickly tucked the wire back behind the metal, glaring at him.
I've still got more changes to implement.
Clearly.
He dodged her swipe with a laugh, nudging her side.
Lax, Tex. Look, you stick to making your gadgets, and I'll stick to what I do best.
Being a pain, loitering, throwing rocks at Zinnia automatons.
Ha ha.
Ricky patted his chest.
Being the bandit king, of course.
He shouted the last part, grinning when all the street kids on the rooftop leapt to their feet, whooping loudly. The oldest among them, a guy with a hooked nose and dark eyes, whistled sharply through his teeth.
Thanks, Beak.
Ricky turned back to Dash with a wink, biting into the bruised apple with a sharp crunch.
You're gonna get caught sooner or later, you know.
Nah.
Ricky spat out an apple seed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand.
You know I always land on my feet.
He startled when Dash suddenly shot up, jumping to her feet.
Land on your feet. You're a genius.
Leaping off the crates, she flew toward the edge of the roof, heading for the ladder. "Later, rat boy."
See you, Tex.
Ricky called after her, shaking his head. If there was one thing that Dash had inherited from her parents, it was their single-minded focus when inspired by a new idea. When her parents were both scientists studying in the field of alchemy, spending weeks on the study of a new chemical compound or metal, Dash had found her passion in the area of mechanology. In the grip of invention, she quickly lost track of time, barely sleeping until she'd finally given life to the latest prototype. Dash laced up the boots, attaching the metal components one by one and checking the fit. Once everything was inserted and calibrated, she stood, testing the weight.
Oh, yes!
Putting her weight onto her toes, she felt the boot accommodate the shift in balance, quickly adjusting to stabilize her weight distribution. With a grin, Dash quickly put on the remaining components of the dress, dashing outside the moment she had secured the last buckle. In record time, she'd made it to the midtown markets and clambered up onto the levels above, climbing the ladder to the street gang's hideout. Yet as she stepped onto the rooftop, she came to a halt, frowning. The kids seemed agitated, checking their surroundings, talking quietly amongst themselves. She looked around, expecting to see Ricky perched on the crates as per usual, but he was nowhere to be seen.
Dude, where the hell?
Cleaners, man.
Guys.
As she approached one of the groups, they quieted, turning towards her with matching frowns. Beak straightened, his expression dark as he met her eyes.
"Hey, Tex."
Mike greeted her quietly, eyes a bright blue against his sooty cheeks.
Hi, Dash.
"Hello, Tex."
Hey, Dash.
"Hey, guys. Any of you seen Ricky?"
The boys looked at each other, hesitating. Finally, Beak spoke up.
It's no good, Tex.
"What do you mean?"
Dash frowned.
Hasn't been here in about a week.
"And you have no idea where he might be?"
When all of them immediately shook their heads, Dash groaned, running a hand through her hair.
"The hell has he gotten himself into this time?"
Dunno. Tried looking in the usual spots, but he's gone. Probably dead.
"Mike."
One of them hissed, but a few others nodded along.
"It's true. He's been gone a week and a half. I never been gone this long before."
"Yeah, he's dead. We gotta go.
"They're on to us." "Yeah, cleaners are probably on their way now." "Guys!"
Dash cut in, shaking her head.
"This is Ricky we're talking about. Remember that time he spent 2 days hiding under a market stall because the enforcers were trying to find him? Or the time he stole a miner's hat and convinced the charge hand he was taken over for the night? Or when he snuck into Natalia's and stole a whole satchel of their prototypes?"
While a couple of the kids nodded hesitantly, muttering to themselves, Beak just shook his head.
You don't get it, Tex. We've been looking for him for a week, and he's just gone. Look, some of the boys already left, gone to lie low for a bit. We gotta keep moving, or it's us next.
With a nod, he got up and walked over to one of the other groups, crouching to talk to a younger boy with ginger hair.
"The hell have you gotten yourself into now, rat boy?"
In the main reception of the registry, Dash stood in line, waiting to reach the main desk. Next to her, a newcomer to the city sat on one of the benches, looking over some papers with a small frown. The couple ahead of her were in a quiet, heated discussion, while a man stood on her other side, reading a Vox-issued newspaper. While Dash had been here only once, it was exactly where she remembered. Even the staff looked as if they hadn't changed, and Dash half expected one of them to see her and run over, asking what she'd blown up this time. Though to be fair, she hadn't known the scientist was running contagion tests on those rats. Next. The couple moved along, revealing the receptionist sitting behind the desk. Her dark brown hair was tied into a neat bun, not a hair out of place, her smile revealing 2 rows of perfectly white teeth. Hello. Welcome to the registry. How can I help you today?
I need information on someone.
Of course. The receptionist nodded, fingers poised over the keys of her typographer. Your name, please?
Dash Teklo.
The woman stilled, gaze flicking up to stare at Dash's face. Her expression cracked into a nervous smile, face several shades paler than it had been previously. Miss Teklo, it's a pleasure to have you in the registry. Please, if you wouldn't mind, I just need a name to begin my search. That is, if you have one.
Ricky Royce.
Thank you, Miss Teklo. Her fingers flew across the keys, eyes tracking across whatever results came up on her screen. I'm very sorry to say this, Miss Teklo, but there doesn't seem to be a Mr. Royce at the Academy, and I'm afraid that I don't have the clearance to access Teklo Corporation records. Of course.
No, he's not. He isn't a member of the Academy or Teklo. He's a street kid.
Oh, I see. Allow me to check our records, Miss Teklo. A second later, she nodded. My apologies, but there are no records of anyone with that name. Do you have an ID number for him, perhaps?
Look, just...
Dash leant across the counter, eyebrows raised.
Let me have a look at the records, yeah? I've got this device in my bag that can charge your typographer.
She began, ignoring the dawning look of sheer panic on the receptionist's face.
It will make it easier to access your records. I know how slow these things go, so just let me...
Miss Teklo, my sincerest apologies, but you are not authorised to...
It'll make searching all of your records so much faster. There's got to be information on them somewhere.
I must insist that you refrain from tampering with registry property.
Couldn't possibly have searched your entire database.
Please, Miss Teklo.
Just let me...
Dash leant over and tried to grab the technographer from the desk, a connection socket emerging from her gauntlet. A second later, a hand grabbed her by the collar, hauling her away from the device.
Let me go. I only need a second.
In answer, the security guard carried her out the door, placing her firmly on her feet just outside. The receptionist came rushing out a moment later, grasping Dash's hand with a fixed smile. Please allow me to apologise on behalf of the registry for this disturbance. We'd like to gift you these tokens for your next visit, and I do hope that you continue to use the registry services in the future.
But I only need to...
My sincerest apologies, Miss Teklo. The receptionist smiled wanly as she stepped backward, ducking behind the looming figure of the security guard. He glowered down at her, face set with determination. With a sigh, Dash stuffed the tokens into one of the pouches on her belt, watching the receptionist hurry back inside. The security guard stared her down as she turned away, stowing the connection port back inside her gauntlet. With the number of agencies, organisations and private investigators available in Metrics, Dash had expected that at least one would be able to help her. But no matter where she went, the answer was always the same. From Beacon to Zescars, the Teklo database to Vox Press, nobody seemed to have information on Ricky Royce, let alone any hint of a location. Still, Dash pressed on, determined to find something, anything. That night over dinner, her parents argued about a Teklo scientist's investigation into the boundary layer effect and their development of a bladeless turbine. Everyone knows mechanical vapour recompression is much more efficient, Dash muttered, picking idly at her dinner with a frown. Finally, her parents turned to look at her, her father raising an eyebrow. Before they could launch into further discussion of the matter, she cleared her throat.
I wanted to ask you about something.
When she was sure she had at least part of their attention, she continued, telling them about her search for Ricky Royce and how she'd failed to find any information on him, even when checking the Teklo database. Neither were particularly surprised to hear that she'd snuck into the complex and accessed the database without permission.
Well, no, there wouldn't be anything. In most cases, there would be little reason for the Teklo database to keep information on scuttlers. Statistically, it's likely that your friend is long gone by now.
Taking a sip of her wine, her mother blinked.
Oh yes, and how has your testing been going? Any luck with the latest prototype?
Dash half-heartedly responded with something about last week's experiment, barely paying attention as she stared blankly at her dinner. As expected, her parents soon turned the conversation back to their own work, leaving her to stab her centennial-produced cutlet in relative peace.
Knew it was a long shot, but I had to try.
Dash glared at the fake meat, poking it idly.
They're like ghosts. How am I supposed to find someone who barely even exists?
Pausing, she sat upright, gesturing with her fork.
Unless I'm looking for the wrong thing. If I can't find the person, maybe I can track the thing instead.
What was that, dear?
Dash looked up to see her parents staring at her and grinned.
Hey, how can I get information on a Cogworks shipment of devices made with Tennyton ore?
Full steam ahead. Dash burst through the window in a shower of glass shards, stomach lurching as she fell forward, plunging through the air. With a flick of her wrist, a hook extended from her gauntlet, her fingers closing around it as it tore into the side of the building. Her body jolted as it immediately slowed her descent, sparks flying where the metal connected. Laughing wildly, she felt her heels connect with the side of the building, metal screeching as she slid down the face of the needle. A scientist called out as she flew past, thumping on the window of his laboratory. The shriek of metal on metal filled the air, ringing loudly as she watched the ground rise up to meet her. Her feet collided with the solid pavement, knees bending as her boots took the brunt of the force. With one final whoop, she retracted the hook and bolted, angry shouts filling the air as scientists emerged from the needle.
Come back here. Someone grab Thero's blasted daughter.
Dash ran for the edge of the street, launching herself over the railing and falling into the darkness of the sprawl. Propelling herself off a rooftop, she made her way onto the streets, falling into step with some of the workers making their way home from the mines. No one looked in her direction as she reached into one of her pouches, withdrawing a small metallic orb.
Kinda small, ain't ya?
Turning it back and forth between her fingers, she found a connection port on the side of the orb and a few gaps in the plating.
Thought you'd be bigger. Still pretty heavy though,
Dash muttered, ducking through a side street as she headed for the midtown markets. The pounding in his head was what woke him up, slowly registering the familiar sharp ache that followed a blow to the back of the head. Hissing through his teeth, he tried to raise a hand to check the wound, but immediately realized that he couldn't move. After a long moment, Ricky Royce opened his eyes, squinting in the bright light of day. A tall man with a patchy beard kneeled in front of him, gaze dark, as he stared blankly at Ricky.
Morning, sunshine. You've been sleeping for ages.
He scratched his beard idly, squinting.
Wasn't sure if you'd wake up.
Ricky didn't answer, gaze flicking to the side as he took in the rest of the room. Wherever they were, the building was certainly run down, showing all the usual signs of the abandoned buildings of early metrics. The bright shine of copper had given way to vivid, waxy blue-green patina, water trails leaving patterns on the walls. Several of the windows had been boarded over in an attempt to conceal the shattered glass panes, while the rest seemed to shake in the slightest breeze.
Hey, I'm talking to you.
A man snapped his fingers in front of Ricky's face, drawing his attention.
You're Ricky Royce, yeah? Why are you looking for him?
Ricky glared, jaw clenching. It was beginning to come back to him, turning up at the Cog Works factory, finding the shipment unguarded, these crazy gits running in to claim everything. None of it explained what they were doing here, or why this lot hadn't killed him yet, or why the man knew his name.
Yeah.
The man grinned.
So we got a plan to cause some trouble for Metrics. And apparently, this kid's good at that. Of course, you don't know where he is. Maybe I'll kill you now and be done with it. All right.
Ricky rolled his eyes.
Yeah, that's me. Good. Here's the deal. No deal.
He cut the other man off, shaking his head.
You gotta show me the others first. I don't want to hear anything until I see him.
The man whistled through his teeth, and a moment later, the doors opened to reveal some other members of the man's group, each holding one of the street kids who had been part of Ricky's heist.
Where's the other two? Dead kid, died at Cog Works. You know those security bots? Shot 'em full of holes.
Setting his jaw, Ricky looked over at the members of his gang, but before he could look for injuries, the group took them away, closing the door once more. The leader, for that's what he had to be, took a knife out of his pocket, twirling it between his fingers.
You're the leader of that little group, ain't you? If you want those little squeakers to live, you're gonna do what I tell you to.
He struck out with the knife, driving it deep into the wall next to Ricky's head.
Boss wants us to cause some trouble. You're gonna help us make sure we ain't gonna be interrupted before we're ready. You try to trick me, mess up my plan, I'll cut up you little buddies one by one. Got it?
After a long moment, Ricky tipped his chin upward, glaring.
Fine. What do you want me to do?
As she drew closer to the heart of Metrics, Dash made a left turn, disappearing into an alleyway and scampering up a ladder to the levels above. As she emerged above the sprawl, entering into the Coppertown sector, the air became thick with the sharp, sour smell of sulphur, smoke turning the world around her slightly hazy. Climbing higher, she made it above the stalls of the Midtown markets, scouring the crowds below. Checking that she was out of sight, Dash activated the induction chamber, withdrawing the connection cable from her dress and attaching it to the port in the orb. The orb fit perfectly into one of the ports on her belt, sliding into place with a neat click. Light travelled along the surface as the device came to life, drawing on the power of the induction chamber. Lifting her arm, Dash watched as her dress calibrated with the orb, sending its display to the unit on her wrist. Slowly, it began to calibrate, giving off a faint pulse as it attuned to her surroundings. Then finally, it let out a single shrill beep. "Okay, little buddy," Dash grinned, slowly turning as she listened for feedback from the device. "Where are we going?" Choosing a direction at random, she began to walk toward the outline of Zinnia Park, listening carefully. In a day, she could cover the whole of the Midtown markets and a part of Low Lake. The next led her down into Coppertown, scouring every street for the slightest signal from her device. However, it continued to stay silent. Every time Dash booted up the device, it would release a series of high-pitched beeps, confirming that it had calibrated correctly. Yet, after weeks of searching metrics sector by sector, Dash was beginning to wonder if perhaps the device hadn't calibrated correctly after all, or if there was an issue with the connection to the induction chamber. Old Metrix was a failure, and the East Rise didn't produce a single signal. As she entered into the expanse, she was startled to discover that the orb began to signal, beeps sounding faster and faster as she drew closer to the source of the Teneton. A light blinked into existence on her display unit, flashing a faint green. On closer inspection, she discovered that it was producing 8 different directional lights, 7 of which were currently inactive. When she turned around, the light turned off, and a different one lit up instead, now turned to face the same direction that the other light had been pointing previously.
Oh, hell yeah!
Holding the device out in front of her, Dash ran toward the northeast, watching as the light blinked faster and brighter with every step. Finally, she found the building, coming to a halt in front of one of the Teklo Corporation's various laboratories. Oh, right! It was the first of several, as Dash found herself pulled to multiple laboratories, peeking in the windows to discover scientists in the process of testing raw Teneton. After several long, exhausting days, Dash finally eliminated the expanse from her search, turning her attention to the sprawl far below.
At least I know it works,
Dash muttered as she slunk back to her room, tossing the device onto her work table.
Where the hell are you, rat boy?
Ricky watched silently as the men unloaded several cases from Cogworks, sorting the weapons into piles. Anything explosive was placed on the main table, sorted by size and yield. Armed with the knowledge of their combined explosive power, seeing them all together made his skin crawl. They set him off by accident. We're all going to be ashes and dust. So, we can definitely get in through the access panel.
Yeah,
Ricky responded, rubbing a hand over his face.
we done it plenty. All you need is a driver and you can pry the scanner right off.
And you're sure there ain't no guards?
Nah, they just got scanners for security.
All right. The leader, Mo, lifted his bat over one shoulder. You know what happens if we get caught?
I know.
Ricky sighed.
Already said I'd done it before. It's gonna work fine.
Right. Hope so for your boys' sakes. Mo signalled to the rest of the group, whistling through his teeth. Hey, listen up. Boss wants us done neat and tidy, no fuck-ups. Bigger the mess, more we get paid. But any of you assholes screw up and get us caught early, we ain't getting nothing. So get your shit together and let's move. Dash was passing through the streets of the sprawl, head bowed over her wrist display, when the device suddenly gave off a beep. She came to a standstill in the middle of the path, slowly turning as a very faint light appeared, pointing north.
Thank fuck for that,
she breathed, beginning to walk in that direction. Yet as she drew closer, the light growing stronger, it suddenly switched directions, pointing west. Don't you short circuit on me. As she turned to continue walking, it beeped loudly at her, all 8 lights flashing simultaneously.
Up top somewhere, huh? And moving fast from the looks of it.
Dash craned her neck backward to look at the levels above, quickly identifying the nearest ladder. The moment she passed into the streets of Coppertown, it switched directions once more, pointing toward the centre of Metrix. Dash ran as quickly as she could, relying on the extra boost from the dress as she made her way through the crowded streets. Passing through Low Lake, she scrambled up a ladder, hauling herself up into the midtown markets. Here, the crowds were even more dense, as Dash struggled to slip between the masses. Squeezing between the stalls and patrons, Dash realised the device was directing her up once again. Using a nearby stall as a stepladder, she craned her neck to scan the crowds, looking for a gap in the flow of traffic. Her gaze landed on a ladder near the entrance to goods, leading up to the miners' walkways that connected to the Gigadrill elevator. Dash cursed under her breath as she pushed her way through the crowds, grasping onto the ladder and throwing herself onto the upper level. As she climbed higher, the signal grew stronger and stronger, leading her onto the maintenance level of the Gigadrill elevator. Past the main walkways, there were few miners up here, making it much easier for Dash to follow the bright, blinking light. The device led her to one of the maintenance doors, its access panel torn off the wall. Dash quietly reached down and turned the Tennyton detector off, silencing its shrill beeping. Her heart raced as she listened carefully, staring at the loose panel. Beyond the door, she could hear faint shouts and the occasional curse. Drawing in a deep breath, she wrapped one hand around the hilt of her Teklo-assigned plasma pistol. When she raised her hand, pistol at the ready, she was proud to note that her hand barely shook at all. Moving closer, she spotted someone standing near the door, just out of sight behind a pillar. The guard stood close to the edge of the metal path, gazing out over the city. With a deep breath, she dashed across the space between them and shoved, sending him flying onto the lower level. Ignoring his angry shouts, she booted the door open, pointing her pistol into the maintenance room. In front of her, 6 men burst into action, reaching for nearby weapons. In a split second, she glanced at the back wall, where she saw one man with a patchy beard standing next to Ricky, who met her gaze with a slack-jawed expression.
"Grab a fucking weapon, rat boy!"
Dash yelled, backing up as one of the men came at her with a nail-studded baseball bat. Even as she ducked, avoiding the blow, her mind dimly wondered why the man was wielding a bat and not one of the endless varieties of Cogworks or Teklo-produced weaponry. Gathering herself, she lashed out with her fist, the gauntlet deploying knuckle guards, as she slammed it into his jaw with a sickening crunch. He collided with the floor with a thud, yelling as he scrabbled for his bat. Turning on her heel, Dash fired the pistol at a man reaching for her, narrowly avoiding the knife that he wielded with one hand. Shit! The shot went wider than she expected, hitting him in the gut instead of the thigh. He went down like a ton of bricks, clutching at his stomach with a weak groan. Another of the men lunged at her, swearing loudly when her boot collided with his ribcage. Lashing out with her other fist, she accidentally deployed the gauntlet's circular saw, which tore through his shoulder like a hot knife through Centennial-produced butter. Leaving him slumped to the floor, she turned and fired at a 4th man, hitting him in the mid-chest, narrowly avoiding another attack from the 5th. He bared his teeth at her, yelling wildly. A second later, a long copper rod connected with the back of his head, a hollow thunk echoing through the room. As he collapsed to the ground, the man revealed Ricky standing behind him, wielding the rod with a grimace.
Enough!
Mo held up the detonator, thumb over the red button.
You fuckers ain't gonna stop me, you hear me?
Dash immediately turned and dove across the room, grabbing Ricky as they soared out of the open doorway. Behind them, the bombs detonated, her dress immediately responding to the shockwave by deploying a dissipation shield. The shockwave sent them both straight over the edge, plummeting to the ground below. She barely had time to register the sprawl of the plaza below them before they slammed into the pavement. For a moment, everything was still, her ears ringing as Dash pressed her face against the cool stone earth. With a groan, She slowly pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, looking at Ricky just next to her. The shield faded away as he stood, wavering slightly on his feet.
"You right, rat boy?"
Her voice was croaky, but he heard her regardless, raising his head to look at her.
Think so. You got any broken bones?
"I think I'm good. You?"
Nah, I'm right.
Good. They got to their feet, looking up at the silhouette of the Gigadrill elevator. High above them, near the top of the Gigadrill, the plasma flared wildly, bolts of light arcing between the metal as the molten plasma dripped down the side of the structure. Dash looked across the plaza at the miners' entrance to Pit 3, watching them spill out of the elevator in a frenzy.
"Tex!"
The light flared, a deafening shriek filling the air as the metal skeleton of the Gigadrill warped, seemingly instantaneously. Energy raced down the face of the structure, crackling loudly as it collided with the outer edge of Pit 3. With a thunderous crack, the main body of the Gigadrill parted in two, its halves whining as they separated, bending toward the nearby buildings of the expanse. The maintenance level crumbled, pieces of foundation and glass tumbling to smash on the pavement below. With that, the Gigadrill shuddered to a stop, and the plaza became quieter than Dash had ever heard it.
Well, shit.
Ricky whistled, shaking his head.
Thanks, Tex. Wouldn't have wanted to be up there.
He turned to look at her, eyebrows furrowed.
That your suit?
Dash laughed breathlessly, gesturing to her chest plate. "Yeah, you're looking at the final design of the dress. We're lucky I decided to incorporate a shielding module." With a dry chuckle, he shrugged.
Well, I take it back. That's pretty cool.
They turned to look at the Midtown markets, watching as people emerged to look at the remains of the Gigadrill. "You had guys with you for the heist, right? They weren't up on the maintenance level, were they?"
Nah, I was the only one that went with them for that.
Ricky frowned, running a hand through his hair.
They're still back with the rest of that group. Said we'd all be set loose once the job was done.
Do you know where they are?
Yeah, paid attention when we left. Old building on the outer limits, just past the junkyards. We gotta go now, Tex. There's still some of those men with him, and I don't trust that they won't just decide to kill him off.
Let's go then. Probably best we get away from this anyway. Anyway.